Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into some really powerful ideas from Steven Bartlett's The Diary of a CEO, and we're going to uncover some of the psychological secrets that are just hiding behind success. So, let's kick things off with a little puzzle for you. How is it possible to be completely right about your product and still go out of business? Well, this was the exact fate of a global music store CEO. He knew for a fact that people loved music, but what he missed was that they didn't just want music, they wanted convenience. They didn't really want the plastic disc. And that story, right there, perfectly tees up our first big idea. In business, and honestly in life, objective reality, it often takes a back seat to perception. It's so much less about what something actually is and way more about what people think it is. Now, we've seen this play out for decades. You probably remember the famous Pepsi challenge, right? In these blind taste tests where people had no idea which brand they were drinking, they consistently chose Pepsi. So factually speaking, they preferred the taste. And this is where it gets really wild. As soon as the branding was visible, people suddenly preferred Coca-Cola. This just goes to show you that the feeling, the story, the whole perception of the brand was actually more powerful than the physical taste itself. That iconic red can literally changed how the drink tasted to them. It's incredible. So that idea leads us right into our next psychological law, mastering the art of the frame. This builds directly on that whole idea of perception. Okay, take a quick look at this. Which one of the horizontal lines is longer? Well, believe it or not, and I know it's hard to see, they are exactly the same length. It's the arrows, the frame around the lines, that tricks your brain into seeing them differently. And this isn't just some neat visual trick. It's exactly how our minds work with language every single day. 90% lean sounds healthy. It sounds appealing. But 10% fat sounds like a warning, right? Even though they are describing the exact same product. One frame is just way more appealing. And businesses use this all the time. Just reframing a sales team to a partnerships team can boost response rates by over 30%. Why? Well, because sales makes people think of a transaction, but partnerships makes them think of collaboration. Same job, different frame. Tesla is an absolute master of this. They don't put plastic in their cars. Oh no, they use vegan leather. It's the same material, but that simple frame completely changes the perceived value from something cheap to something premium and ethical. Okay, so once you start to really get this whole framing thing, you can use it to solve problems in some truly innovative ways. The book calls these psychological moonshots, basically using psychology to make these giant leaps forward without changing the core product. Here's a classic example for you. Let's go back to 2008. Domino's has a huge problem. Their customers are constantly calling, complaining about how long their pizza is taking. It was a total headache. So, how do you think they solved it? Now, you might think, okay, they hired more drivers, or maybe offered some kind of money-back guarantee. But nope, they didn't actually speed up the delivery at all. Instead, they went after the psychological problem. They had this huge realization. It wasn't the wait itself that people hated. It was the uncertainty of the wait. The anxiety of not knowing where their pizza was, that was the real issue. And boom, the pizza tracker was born. This is a perfect example of a psychological moonshot. It wasn't some massive, expensive operational overhaul. It was a relatively cheap piece of software that made a giant leap in customer satisfaction just by giving people a sense of control and changing their perception of the wait. Then once you know what to look for, you start to see these clever psychological hacks absolutely everywhere. You know the closed door button in most elevators? Yeah. A lot of the time, it's not even connected to anything, but it gives us a feeling of control. Or that tingly feeling in some soaps, it's added specifically to make you feel like it's working. These aren't technical solutions, they're psychological ones. And this all points to a bigger idea, which is summed up perfectly by the marketing expert Rory Sutherland. He argues that the biggest breakthroughs of the future won't just be technological, they'll be psychological. Because let's face it, it's often way cheaper and more effective to change perception than to change reality. All right, let's get to our final law. And I gotta warn you, this one feels a little backwards. We're always told to visualize success, right? But what if the real superpower is actually visualizing failure? See, we're all wired with something called the ostrich effect. You know that feeling when you've maybe spent a bit too much and you just do not want to look at your bank account? Or you put off going to the doctor because you're scared of what they might find? Yep. That's it. We literally bury our heads in the sand.
So, if our natural instinct is to just look away from things that make us anxious, how on earth are we supposed to fight that powerful bias to stop failures from happening in our projects, our businesses, and our lives?
Well, there's this brilliant technique called a pre-mortem. Instead of a post-mortem after everything's gone wrong, you do it beforehand. You get your team together and you imagine it's a year from now and the project has failed spectacularly. Then you work backwards to figure out every possible reason why. This simple exercise just bypasses our natural optimism bias and forces us to stare those risks right in the face. And that, right there, is the power of negative manifestation. Look, this isn't about being a pessimist. It's about being a prepared and strategic realist. And the paradox is that embracing this kind of negative thinking and really planning for failure can actually be one of the most positive things you ever do for your success. So, we've seen how perception, framing, and even a little negative thinking can completely shape our reality. This leaves us with one final thought. A question for you. What is one frame in your own life that you can change starting today?